Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving headfirst into a political situation that just got really interesting. We're talking about this audio message from Masoud Rajavi, the leader of the Iranian Resistance. It seems to have set off, well, quite an explosion of reactions across the board.
That's right. And this deep dive, it's all about trying to unravel the complex layers behind this really quite rare statement from him. Our main source for today is an exclusive interview. It's with Mr. Esmail Mohades. He's a writer, a translator, and the interview was originally done by Radio Irava.
Yeah, and our mission here, it's pretty clear. We want to cut through all the noise, sift through the different interpretations, and really try to zero in on the strategic thinking behind Rajavi releasing this statement now. What does it actually tell us about the power dynamic, the opposition dynamics inside Iran? Because, I mean, here's the thing that catches your ear, right? You hear an opposition leader telling his followers, look, don't criticize this other figure, Mir-Hossein Mousavi. On the surface, that sounds, well, completely backwards. So what's the calculation there? What's the political move? And, what could it mean for the whole region? Okay, let's unpack this. So the message itself, it came out July 21st, 2025. That's 30 tier 1404 in the Iranian calendar. And its core message, like you said, was super specific. Do not kick and sting Mir-Hossein Mousavi because it benefits Khamenei.
Exactly. And the way it was delivered, that's also really significant. It was Rajavi's actual voice, which, I mean, that's a rare thing. For his supporters, it was probably quite powerful, a real affirmation. And for his detractors, well, the ones who always question if he's around or even alive, it sort of serves as undeniable proof of life.
Right.
It definitely quieted some speculation.
Right. And the date they chose, July 21st, that wasn't just random, was it? It seems loaded with history. You've got July 21st, 1952, Mossadegh returning to power after that popular uprising. And then exactly on July 21st, 1981, Rajavi himself founded the National Council of Resistance of Iran, the NCRI. When you put those dates together, it feels very intentional, like a carefully choreographed move, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. The timing screams deliberate calculation.
Yeah.
Very precise. And the reactions, yeah, like you mentioned, they were kind of unprecedented. Friends, foes, everyone reacted. Some people immediately jumped to, oh, this shows a national perspective from Moravi. Others thought, well, it's direct support for Mousavi. And some even floated the idea it was an attempt to, maybe attract Mousavi towards the democratic opposition. So, yeah, lots of different reads. How do we make sense of it all?
Well, I think it's crucial to state this right up front. This message is definitely not an endorsement of Mousavi's politics, his past actions, anything like that. And it's certainly not, an invitation saying, come join us in the resistance. Instead, our source, Mr. Mohades, really emphasizes this. It's a cold, hard political calculation. Think of it more like a strategic chess move, not really an olive branch.
Okay, a calculation. And that calculation, it's rooted in Khamenei's vulnerability at that moment. The source mentions Khamenei was trying hard to project this image of unprecedented unity, especially after something called a 12-day war, sounds like some intense internal political fight, apparently caused serious cracks, forces falling apart right at the top. So Khamenei needed to pull things back together, needed cohesion badly.
Exactly right. And that's precisely where Mousavi's statement calling for a referendum landed like a bombshell. Crucially, it came from within the Islamic Republic's own camp. Someone from the inside was questioning things, and that just directly blew up Khamenei's whole unity narrative, caused major problems for him right when he was trying to look strong and unified.
So, okay, the directive is don't kick and sting Mousavi. But, I mean, for an opposition leader, that still feels odd. What's the strategic brilliance behind that? Why would attacking Mousavi actually help Khamenei?
Yeah, it seems paradoxical, doesn't it? But it's kind of like indirect political warfare. Rajavi's point, as explained in the source, is this. If the resistance piles on Mousavi for his statement, it actually lets Khamenei off the hook. It takes the pressure off the main target. It's almost like a political judo move, right? Instead of directly pushing Mousavi, Rajavi's using Mousavi's own move, his internal critique, to destabilize Khamenei.
Oh, okay.
By telling his supporters to leave Mousavi alone, Rajavi forces Khamenei to deal with dissent coming from inside his own house. It undermines that unity story Khamenei wants to tell. So the real insight is, sometimes your best move isn't attacking everywhere, but strategically letting a disruptive element inside the enemy camp do its work.
Right, letting the internal pressure build. And this ties into what the source calls the principle of power. Can you explain that concept a bit more?
Yeah, the principle of power. It's basically like a political compass for the resistance, as described. Every single decision, every single action is measured against one simple question. Does it hurt Khamenei or does it help him? Khamenei is identified as the main enemy, the ultimate target. He's the fixed point. So it's not about whether they agree with Mousavi or like what he stands for. It's purely about the effect his actions have on Khamenei's power. It shows a really focused and calculated strategy at play.
Okay, so to really get why this don't kick and sting applies specifically to Mousavi, we probably need a bit more context on him. His history is long and, well, complicated. He was prime minister back in the 80s during what some called Khamenei's golden era.
Yeah.
But that era also includes the incredibly dark chapter of the 1988 massacre, 30,000 political prisoners executed, mostly MEK supporters.
That's correct. And Mousavi's role, or alleged knowledge and responsibility as the head of the executive branch back then, it's been a huge point of contention ever since. Initially, he claimed he didn't know, which, frankly, our expert source calls worse than the crime. Later, his story shifted more towards claiming he was hopeless to stop it. International groups have definitely called for accountability. And importantly, Mousavi himself has said he wants to return to that golden era of the Imam.
Wanting to return to that era, given how controversial it is, especially the massacre, how does that square with what looks like an evolution in his political stance later on? Can you trace those shifts for us?
Yeah, it's a series of shifts, certainly, but they've always been within a specific sort of boundary. He started out participating in elections, trying to push for reform, but always within the Vilayat-e-Faqih system. That's the core principle of clerical rule, the supreme leader's absolute power. Then, after the Green Movement in 2009, his demands was more about adhering to the existing constitution. And then, most recently, after the big 2022 uprising, he called for a referendum on a new constitution.
But even that call for a new constitution, it still seems to operate within the regime's overall framework, right? So what's the fundamental difference, the real dividing line between Mousavi's path and the Iranian resistance's goal?
That is absolutely the crux of it. Our source even calls Mousavi's approach strange for a dictatorship because it still engages so much with the regime's structures. The absolute fundamental strategic difference is this. The Iranian resistance, the NCRI, the MEK, they believe the regime cannot be reformed. It's unreformable, must be overthrown, full stop. Mousavi, though, throughout his career, has consistently looked for ways to achieve reform from within the system. Between those two positions, overthrow versus reform from within, there's essentially no common ground. They're aiming for fundamentally different outcomes.
That divide seems pretty unbridgeable, which makes you wonder, is there any chance Mousavi might, shed his skin, as they say, and actually cross over to the overthrow camp? People have speculated.
Well, our expert source is pretty emphatic in dismissing that possibility. Highly unlikely. You look at his age, he's 84, and his history is just so deeply intertwined with the regime, decades of it. A radical shift like that seems improbable. The source also expresses strong doubts about whether Mousavi genuinely believes in real democracy, given his past. And you contrast that with the sheer radicalism, the revolutionary drive you saw in the young people during the 2022 protests, or in figures like Behrouz Ehsani and Mir-Hossein, who were recently executed. Their words, their actions, they represent a totally different path than Mousavi's. His is reformist, theirs is revolutionary.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, thinking about his safety, Rajavi's message essentially paints Mousavi as useful in a way because he's causing trouble for Khamenei. Does saying, don't attack him, inadvertently put Mousavi in more danger? He's already been under house arrest for, 16 years?
The argument from our source is no, probably not. First, Mousavi has taken, let's say, despicable stances against the MEK himself in the past. There's no love lost there. Second, and more fundamentally, nobody is truly safe under this regime. Safety is relative and conditional. Khamenei makes decisions about Mousavi, or anyone, based entirely on his own political interests and calculations. Rajavi's statements aren't likely to be the deciding factor. And Mousavi, he's a veteran politician. He knows the risks he's taking with his statements. He understands the dangerous game he's playing.
Right. Okay, now let's pivot slightly to another really interesting contrast in Rajavi's message. Why attack Reza Pahlavi, the late Shah's son, while telling people to lay off Mousavi? It really highlights this idea of different kinds of opposition, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And it's a perfect illustration of that principle of power we talked about. It's all about the effect on Khamenei. Mousavi's call for a referendum, again, the key is it comes from within the regime's historical camp. That makes it uniquely damaging to Khamenei's unity narrative. It's an attack from the inside, so to speak.
Okay, and compare that to Reza Pahlavi. He also talks about a referendum, but his approach is different. He controversially suggests changing the regime, but potentially with help from parts of the current security apparatus, like the IRGC and intelligence forces.
And that right there is why Pahlavi is attacked in the message. Our source explains that Pahlavi's approach is seen as dangerous because it risks legitimizing the very forces responsible for so much oppression. the IRGC, the intelligence ministry, it's viewed as sowing discord, promoting what the source calls reactionary and colonial Shah worship, which ultimately, the argument goes, just benefits Khamenei. How? By confusing the opposition movement, muddying the waters, maybe offering false hope and collaborating with parts of the oppressive structure.
Ah, I see.
So what's fascinating is you have these two figures. Mousavi's actions, from Mousavi's perspective, weaken the regime's core by exposing internal cracks. Pahlavi's approach, again from this perspective, inadvertently strengthens the regime by creating divisions and confusion within the broader opposition forces.
Okay, so wrapping up our deep dive today on this Rajavi message, the core takeaway seems to be this. It was a very calculated strategic political move. It was aimed squarely at exploiting weaknesses and divisions inside the Iranian regime, specifically targeting Khamenei. It wasn't about endorsing Mousavi or forming an alliance. And that fundamental strategic gap, the resistance wanting overthrow, Mousavi seeking reform, that remains as wide as ever.
Precisely. For the Iranian resistance, as presented in our source material, the struggle, the focus, the unifying target is absolutely Khamenei. He is defined as the main enemy of the Iranian nation. Every tactic, every statement seems to be weighed against that single criterion. How does it affect the central struggle against the supreme leader's authority? It's always about finding ways to destabilize that core power.
And maybe a final provocative thought for you, our listener, to chew on. It comes from a quote by Jamshid Payman mentioned in the source material. He poses this idea. What if, back in 1981, all opponents of Khamenei's tyranny had actually united with Masoud Rajavi? If they'd all chanted death to the principle of Velayat e-Faqih together, could many people, maybe even including Mir-Hossein Mousavi himself, have avoided this 43-year calamity, as Payman calls it? It really makes you think, doesn't it? What are the real, tangible costs when an opposition movement remains divided? And what lessons can we maybe draw from history for future movements trying to achieve fundamental change, especially when, for many involved, the ultimate overthrow is seen as the inevitable destiny of these mullahs, something to definitely mull over.
جلاد اینجا نامش ایرانه نه جای شابول است و نه شیخ مان در این خانه مغول با ظلم و جور تازید سکندر خشم و کین بارید ز خاک برخاست باز این نام به دست صاحب خانه گور دوم کن جلاد اینجا نامش ایرانه نه جای شابول است و نه شیخ مان در این خانه مغول با ظلم و جور تازید سکندر خشم و کین بارید ز خاک برخاست باز این نام به دست صاحب خانه تو ای دشقیم ای جلاد ای آخونده غارتگر تو ای خائن ای طرار برای اجنبی لنگر غلام چینی و روسی وطن حراج و دیوسی حرامی لقمه بی عقل و بی وجدان و ناموسی به نحسی هر کجا باشی شود آبادی ویرانه بر این میهن تو ای نکبت چنان خصمی و بیگانه تو ای پرکین تر از کژدم گراز وحشی بیدم نداری رحم ای میرم تو بر نان شب مردم گورتو گم کن ای جلاد اینجا نامش ایرانه نه جای شابول است و نه شیخ مان در این خانه مغول با ظلم و جور تازید سکندر خشم و کین بارید ز خاک برخاست باز این مام به دست صاحب خانه گورتو گم کن ای جلاد اینجا نامش ایرانه نه جای شابول است و نه شیخ مان در این خانه مغول با ظلم و جور تازید سکندر خشم و کین بارید ز خاک برخاست باز این مام به دست صاحب خانه شما ای آیت الله ها که لب قفل کرده خاموشید به خانه مفت چون گرگو به وقت ظلم چون موشید ستایشگر به شاهانید هم پیمان ضحاکید شما ها ننگ تاریخید شما ها ضد انسانید کنون طوفان آگاهی به سیل خلق در راهه نه از جهل و عبا ماند نرد از شیخ و عمامه دگر ملت نمیخواهد که مرگ خیش را بیند به جای نان و آزادی به زیر فقر بنشیند ای جلاد اینجا نامش ایرانه، نه جای شابود است و نه شیخ مانده در این خانه. مغول با ظلم و جور تازید، سکندر خشم و کین بارید، ز خاک برخاست باز این مام به دست صاحب خانه. گوره گم کن ای جلاد اینجا نامش ایرانه، نه جای شابود است و نه شیخ مانده در این خانه. مغول با ظلم و جور تازید، سکندر خشم و کین بارید، ز خاک برخاست باز این مام به دست صاحب خانه.